Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Fantasy Baseball. I'm John Cuh, and I am joined by Patrick Fitzgerald. In this episode, we are going to go over the latest news and notes around baseball, recap the hitter and pitcher performances from this past week, and of course, some streamer recommendations at the end of the show. Plus, Pitcher List writer Adam Solorio is going to join the podcast to talk about his recent article on Max Meyer and his Arsenal changes. So we've got a show full of stuff. That being said, Patrick, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Some good, some bad. I'm so glad that my Orioles could help your Twins get back on track with a sweep. That's just great stuff. So I hope that you enjoyed that.
Yeah, it was. It's been a good couple days for the Twins. They somehow managed to win 5 games in a row, and I think we get to face you guys again next week in Camden. So
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be
here's the
catching one
thing,
of the
though,
games.
your team will be a lot healthier next week. So
I hope so. I'm,
yeah,
I'm hoping we can get you guys back, but I can't say I'm confident at this point. It's been dire straits, but I guess a little bit of that's the peaks and valleys of the season, and a little bit is we're not the team we thought we were. So I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes.
yeah, it's a little unfortunate just with all the young hitting talent that the Orioles have. That it's the pitching that's absolutely letting the team down right now.
Yeah, you just have to hope it's a down year. I don't think the season's lost, but it is going to be a down year, and you just have to hope that's just what it is. You hope it's not the start of the competitive window closing because that would just be so disappointing.
Right. I mean, with guys like Adley and Gunnar, um, it Heston Kierkegaard, Kobe Mayo, like it just seems crazy that the window would be closing in any sort of way. So, um, Jackson Holiday needs to maybe get a little bit better at the plate, but
Yeah, he's
yeah.
shown he's shown some good signs lately. Kerstad and Mayo have been pretty rough. Gunnar Henderson too.
Oh
Obviously he
my
missed spring
goodness.
training,
Yeah.
so you were expecting a slow start, but then he kind of started getting going, and now it's kind of fallen off a little bit. So we don't
Yeah.
have that one big bat that a lot of good teams have. Obviously, that's not our biggest problem, but the lineup hasn't been world class. So
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully, as we go through the injury notes, there'll be some good news for the Orioles
mhm.
coming up. Anyways, before we get into it, just a reminder that you could follow our podcast on Twitter at This Week PL. You could send us your fantasy baseball questions to our email at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. And of course, make sure you subscribe to or follow the podcast on whatever streaming platform that you listen to. We're on all of them: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen. Make sure you follow and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. All right, we have a very long list of injury news, so let's try to go through it without too much too much time wasted on the clock. We are going to start though with injury placements, and there's a lot of them. Tommy Edman of the Dodgers went on the 10-day IL with right ankle inflammation. All signs point to him probably coming back soon, though, so it's not a serious injury. Yordan Alvarez of the Astros goes on the 10-day IL with a muscle strain in his right hand. He's just not been good this season, so hopefully this is an opportunity for him to rest a little bit, get right. Houston's kind of been also expressing this a similar sentiment that they're hoping this trip to the IL will fix Yordan. Shota Imanaga going on the 15 DIL with a left hamstring strain. Basically, he was running to cover first, and then I guess strain the hamstring. But according to the Cubs, it's pretty mild. He probably only skips one start and would be on the injury list for the minimum amount of time. Jesse Winker of the Mets goes on the 10-day IL with a grade 2 right oblique strain. He is going to miss 6 to 8 weeks, which is kind of a big deal for the Mets because Winker was kind of there, had slotted in as kind of the primary DH for a little bit. Um, I think the corresponding move at the time was calling up Brett Beatty, but
Mhm.
it remains to be seen how the Mets ultimately deal with Winker's absence for the next couple months. Tyler Callahan of the Cincinnati Reds, in only his fourth major league game, which is unfortunate, goes on the 10-day IL with a broken left forearm after running into the wall chasing after a foul ball. Teoscar Hernandez of the Dodgers going on the 10-day IL with a adductor injury. Just sounds like he should be back, though, pretty soon. Probably 2 weeks. So maybe not the minimum stay, but close to the minimum stay. Noelvi Marte of the Reds, we just talked about him a couple weeks ago, actually, going on the 10-day IL with a grade 2 left oblique strain as well, similar to Winker. He's probably going to be out for 1 to 2 months at least. Evan Phillips of the Dodgers going on the 15 DL with forearm discomfort. Expect the minimum stay. This is more precautionary thing for the Dodgers. Never love to hear forearm discomfort for any pitcher. So they're just putting him on the IL for safety. And then Andrew Benintendi going on the 10 DL with a left calf strain. Don't expect too much of an issue there. And then Tristan Casas last weekend in the series against the Twins ruptured his patellar tendon. He's likely out for season. And that's kind of a big deal because there really is no natural first base replacement for him with the Red Sox. Patrick, any thoughts here on what the Red Sox try to do and if whoever the replacement ends up being is someone who's worth considering in fantasy baseball?
Yeah, it looks like the short term at least is Romy Gonzalez. So he's kind of like a utility infielder who plays everywhere. I think he has quadruple infield eligibility in Yahoo, but I don't think he's relevant in 16 teamers right now. Maybe if he starts to produce, he'll be relevant in 12 teamers. Just has like a nice bench guy who covers off days and things like that. It seems like Vaughn Grissom is going to be playing first base in AAA. He's like a nice batting average guy potentially, but also in deeper leagues again. I was hoping that this would clear some space for Roman Anthony and Marcelo Meyer, but Rafael Devers is refusing to play first base. The saga there continues, so I don't think it's really going to have any trickle-down impact there. But yeah, it looks like Romy Gonzalez is the winner in the short term, which is not super exciting, but hopefully he has an okay profile.
Yeah, it's the one thing where for some reason the Red Sox have like two of the best prospects in baseball and they can't figure out a way to bring them onto the major league roster. Partially because like the major leaguers are actually like doing okay, but also because Rafael Devers refuses to move over to first base and just open up another slot for a player to come in.
Yeah, I think Cedar Rafael is going to lose out, but also Trevor Story has kind of fallen back to earth, so it could be him. But yeah, just want to touch on quickly playing time changes from these injuries with the Dodgers. It looks like from Edman and Teoscar going down, Andy Pajas gets locked into his everyday role. HYSEONG Kim got called up, and he's not going to play every day, but he should play a good amount, and he has a lot of speed, so he's a great stolen base guy. And then James Outman, it looks like, could be on the big side of a platoon, so that he's back in the majors, which is nice to see. I think he hit a home run the other day. With Jordan, it's Zach DeZenzo and Cam Smith are getting some more run, which is nice. And then with Imanaga, Cade Horton, news broke today that he's going to get the call, so it might just be a spot start, but maybe not, so that'll be cool to see. And I think those are really the big ones. Noelvi Marte, we talked about him a week or two ago, and he seemed to be breaking out, which I wasn't a full believer in, but it's just a bummer to see him go down because, we just can't learn as much about him now. He was showing some new skills, and it would have been good to see, is it legit or is he going to fall back to earth? So obliques are tough too. That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, obliques are definitely tough just to be a good batter in the first place. That's kind of the rough part. And going back to the Cade Horton Shota Imanaga conversation, like they could actually probably keep Shota, miss 2 starts and have Cade Horton up for more than just a spot start, which I think would be really helpful to see, at least just to know, what Cade's got, and if he. You're not going to be able to make a determination on who he is as a major league pitcher from 1 to 2 starts, but it'll be nice to see him face a major league batter batting and see, does this kid have it?
Yeah, and the results from Ben Brown have been spotty, so it's not like a Phillies type situation where they have all 5 of their starters locked in. If Horton shows some good stuff, the Cubs, they want to win now, so he could stick. I don't know. It's not guaranteed, but there's a chance.
Yeah. All right, maybe happier news, some returns from the injured list. We're going to start with Jackson Merrill, who came back on Tuesday after dealing with a right hamstring strain. Yoan Moncada activated for the 10-day IL. I don't know why you would have him on your fantasy teams, but if you're in a deep enough league, maybe Moncada is worth a pickup. Dylan Moore of Seattle, who had some really nice flashes earlier this season, activated from the 10-day IL. A couple Minnesotans, Willie Castro and Royce Lewis, both activated from the 10-day IL on Monday. And then Lance McCullers Jr. was activated from the 15-day IL through 3.2 scoreless innings against the White Sox in his start on, I want to say it was Sunday. But I know we've been talking a little bit about McCullers over the past couple of weeks about, his imminent return. Good to see him finally take the mound and pitch for the first time in a couple of years.
Yeah, the stuff doesn't seem to quite be what it used to be, but it's just nice to see him out there. I don't think there's a lot of huge playing time losers here necessarily. Ryan Gusto got bumped from the rotation for the Astros after showing some good stuff, which is a little bit of a bummer. But I think that's really the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, and in terms of the other batters that got added, don't think Dylan Moore changes really anything in Seattle in terms of playing time. Right, like I don't even know who was taking over for him at second, but it's unlikely to
Yeah,
be.
maybe like Leo Rivas, Master Boney, guys like that who really aren't
Yeah,
on the radar to
exactly.
begin with. So
Yep. In Minnesota, Edward Julian got sent down to AAA, but you likely weren't starting him even in an AL only league. So,
mhm.
yeah, not a whole lot of changes here with these guys coming back to the roster. We do have a lot of injury news, though. Just some updates for everyone. So let's run through these. George Kirby, Seattle, we got rehab start on Sunday, 42 pitches in that one. Still probably be a while before he makes it back to the majors. Ryan Weathers in Miami finally probably has his last rehab start today on Thursday. He got up to 60 pitches in his most previous one. I'm very excited to see how Weathers comes back. I think we mentioned this. We had this discussion last week. Just kind of want to rehash it again. Once Weathers gets called up to the majors, do you think he's worth at least a spec ad, or would you want to wait and see?
Yeah, I think he's worth a spec ad. I don't know. It depends on who he faces in his first outing if he's a start right away. But the stuff he's showing in his rehab assignments pretty much mirrors the slightly improved stuff that we saw in spring training. You know, he's touching 98, 99. He did walk 4 guys in his last rehab outing in AAA. So, that is concerning. And if I saw, 3 or 4 walks this time, I don't know if I'd run him out there for the first start, but, it's going to be exciting to have him back. I think he's a good, in our ESPN or Yahoo leagues, right? It's a add the guy to the IL, but you don't have to activate him for his first start, kind of a free look type thing. So I think he's definitely worth that.
Yeah. Uh, Another pitcher, Corbin Burns, Arizona, threw a bullpen session on Wednesday, so he was doing some stuff, but he is on track to make his next start on Saturday. So just something to monitor there if you have Corbin Burns on your roster. Walker Buehler of the Red Sox dealing with minor bursitis. He should be back after the minimum stint on the 15-day IL. Logan Gilbert of the Mariners resumed throwing again. There's no word yet on his timetable for a return. Kumar Rocker of the Rangers, he's going to need a week before starting throwing bullpen sessions and then rehab assignments after that. So probably be somewhere between 2 weeks to a month before Rocker is even close to be coming back. Spencer Strider was cleared to long toss and did throw a bullpen session on Wednesday. He's making kind of the slow return back, dealing with I believe it's a hamstring injury.
Mhm.
So, yeah, he's still very slowly in making his return back to the majors after coming back from Tommy John earlier this season. Freddie Peralta of Milwaukee, he's just getting a few extra days of rest. He's dealing with a growing injury right now. Expect his next start to get pushed back by a couple days. Carter Crawford of the Red Sox faced live hitters over the weekend. No timetable yet for his start of his rehab assignment or his return. Justin Martinez of the Diamondbacks will begin throwing later this week. We mentioned him last week, was technically the closer, then got hurt, and I think it's been Shelby Miller who's taking over for him. But with Martinez, if he comes back, we'll see if he gets that closer role or if Arizona decides just to do closer by committee, which was the plan at the beginning of the season, anyways. DJ LeMahieu of the Yankees could be closer to return after going through his rehab assignment. He's been dealing with calf issues. I don't really know if LeMahieu is someone that you'd want to pick up even if he comes back to the majors. Any thoughts there, Patrick?
Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe AL only because they do have some holes in the infield, but I feel like he's not going to play every day anyway, just because he struggles so much to stay healthy. So yeah, not really too much of just doesn't need to be on your radar all that much.
Mm-hmm. Drake Cronenworth of the Padres started a rehab assignment on Tuesday after dealing with a rib fracture for the beginning of the season. So he probably comes back next week, something like that.
Mhm.
Will be an interesting addition to that Padres team. I don't know if he ends up slotting in the DH role for them or if he kind of slides to second base. Any thoughts on Cronenworth and what his value looks like when he's back in the majors?
Yeah, he's kind of one of those quiet, steady contributors. I think he has double eligibility in first base, second base in most leagues, which is pretty useful. Yeah, he's like a 20 home run, bat in his solid seasons. He's kind of just an across the board type contributor. He's just like a nice guy to fill out your roster in shallower leagues and then like fill out your starting lineup in, slightly deeper leagues. They have a lot of holes in the lineup right now. It looks like they're running Tyler Wade out there a
Yeah.
lot in
Mm-hmm.
second base, who I honestly forgot was even still in the majors. So they're definitely going to be glad to have him back. It's impressive what the Padres have been able to do so far, given, some of the names they've been running out there because of these injuries.
Yeah, it looks like it's a timeshare between Tyler Wade and Jose Iglesias. So,
What year is
granted,
it?
yeah, granted, Cronenworth, like I think last year he focused a lot more at first base, wasn't playing a lot of second. Um, so we'll see if they end up keeping him at second or move to first and move Arias to second, which would be kind of a weird decision, I think.
Yeah, two not great options, but I guess they got to play somewhere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or they could move Gavin Sheets from DH. That could be the other option there.
Probably not a great idea.
No. Trio of Baltimore news. Tyler O'Neill started a rehab assignment on Tuesday. He's been dealing with neck inflammation. Should be back next week. Zach Eflin threw a bullpen session on Wednesday, threw 4 innings in a rehab assignment earlier this week, and should be on track to face the Angels. I believe on Sunday is when Brandon Hyde said his next start is going to be. And then Jordan Westberg is starting a minor league rehab assignment later this week. Probably expect him back late next week or the week after. Max Scherzer of Toronto is facing live batters on Wednesday, but he can't be activated until late May anyway. So at least good to see him, facing some competition. But the timeline for his return is still a ways off. Yuri Perez of the Marlins threw 27 pitches in a rehab assignment on Tuesday. Again, he's on the 60 DIL, so he's got a pretty long timetable for return as well. Josh Lowe of the Tampa Bay Rays is going to AAA to continue his rehab assignment. He could be back next week, and I think that's an interesting candidate. Probably was on a lot of ILs. He probably wasn't dropped necessarily because he got hurt on opening day. But if Josh Lowe is available on your waiver wire, is this a guy that you'd be looking to pick up when he comes back?
Yeah, I think in your 12-team formats in deeper, I would be. He should be a nice steal source, hopefully. And he's another kind of 5-category contributor, but doesn't exactly stand out in any one category, except when he spikes a big steal season. So yeah, I think he's worth having. In your shallower formats where he's more of a fringe guy, you probably want to check the upcoming schedules and see how many lefties Tampa has coming up, because he's not going to face a whole lot of those. But yeah, I think that he's worth keeping an eye on. Probably Cameron Miser is probably going to be the big loser here. But, with the Rays, the playing time stuff is always so hard to figure out. And there's a lot of timeshare, so it can be frustrating.
Yeah, there could be just like the random chance that Josh Lowe is healthy and he comes up and then he doesn't play because the Rays make weird decisions. All right, Brandon Woodruff is he just threw 83 pitches in his most recent rehab start. Could be returning this weekend to the Brewers. No official moves have been made, but the Brewers do play Tampa Bay this weekend, and then they go to Cleveland. So we'll see if they call him back up to the Major League roster for any of those series. Ivan Herrera of the Cardinals caught 7 innings after dealing with some knee soreness last weekend. That paused his rehab assignment. Could be activated as soon as this upcoming Friday. So by the time this podcast comes out, you'll probably know if Ivan Herrera is back in the majors. William Contreras of the Brewers dealing with a broken finger, but he is not going on IL as for now. I think they're kind of figuring out if this will affect his catching or his hitting, which in my opinion, it probably would. It's a broken finger, but we'll see what the Brewers ultimately decide there. Clayton Kershaw of the Dodgers threw 6 hitless innings at the rookie level because he can still dominate like that. He's actually slotting for a potential return to the majors in a week or so. I didn't realize that it was going to be coming up this quick. Obviously, Kershaw's Kersh. He's a legend. Is he worth a pickup, though, when he comes back?
I think in wins leagues, 12 team and deeper wins leagues, he is. I mean, it's the Dodgers, right? They're a juggernaut. And it's not like he's, struggling in these rehab assignments. It sounds like the stuff's a little diminished. He might be sitting like 89, which is going to be a little bit weird to see. But I think he's kind of like Weathers. You add him, put him on your IL and see what it looks like in his first start back. He's not the guy he used to be, but he's still, I don't think we'll ever see Clayton Kershaw pitch in the major leagues and not be capable of getting people out. I'm not saying he's going to flash a 3 ERA, but I think that he's going to be a viable guy. Yeah.
Yeah. It might not be like 4 to 5 strikeouts, might be like 2 to 3, but in wins leagues, I think he still definitely has value. And of course, the Dodgers just have a revolving door at their number 5 slot, so they're probably going to welcome having Kershaw back. Right now, Landon Knack's their number 5 guy, and he was just basically called up for a spot start, so I don't even know if his spot on the rotation is guaranteed, but they could definitely use Clayton on their team, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Aaron Savali of the Brewers making a rehab start today. See how that goes, and not sure in terms of a timetable on when he's returning, but the Brewers could use some help with their rotation. A couple Dodgers pitchers, Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow, both will are cleared to start playing catch on Friday. Probably still a bit before either of them come back. Both of them are dealing with shoulder inflammation, I believe, is the official designation. So yeah, the Dodgers got a lot of pitchers that are dealing with stuff right now. Richard Fitz of the Red Sox is scheduled to throw a bullpen session on Thursday, so starting his return for the 15-day IL. We've mentioned a couple Red Sox pitchers already, and they do have a full rotation right now. So it's probably hard to see Fitz, even when he comes back healthy in a couple weeks, if he's going to make it onto the Major League rotation. But he showed some stuff in his Major League stint that I think was positive, and hopefully he's able to come back to the majors after coming back from the injured list. Hunter Green of the Reds left his Wednesday start with a right groin injury. It's diagnosed as a grade 1 strain. So I believe that means he's probably going in the IL, but I don't think the move has officially been made yet. But yeah, big blow to the Reds for sure. And some other news, Dylan Cease left the 7th inning of his Wednesday start with a right forearm cramp. I believe he was he through a no-hitter at that point?
I think he gave up a hit and then came out, but I think he took a no-hitter into the 7th inning.
Yes, yeah, that's what it was. But again, it's just a cramp. I think they just removed him for cautionary reasons. He is likely going to make his start next week. JT Realmuto is currently day-to-day with a left foot contusion. Andres Jimenez of the Blue Jays was removed from Wednesday's game with right quad tightness. Zach Geloff is pausing his rehab assignment due to a stress reaction in his ribs. And Sawyer Gibson-Long of the Detroit Tigers is set to begin a rehab assignment in Low A. In terms of other transactional news, we already mentioned Cade Horton coming up and pitching for the Cubs. Evan Carter of the Rangers was called back up and did rejoin the starting lineup immediately, batting 7th. So we'll see if there's kind of a timeshare between him and I believe it's... who's the outfielder that he's in the timeshare with right now?
Well, they got rid of Leody Taveras, so
that's true. Yeah, Taveras got rid of.
And I think Kevin Pillar went on the IL, so I don't know. He might be getting pretty good run, but I'm sure he's not going to play against every lefty.
Yeah. I forget who. Maybe it was Josh Smith I was thinking of. But anyways, yeah, Evan Carter back in the majors. So. Yeah, a lot of injury news, a lot of small transactions here and there. Any additional thoughts on all of these?
Yeah, just some quick hits. Going back to Brandon Woodruff, he's been doing a lot of rehab starts in the minors, which, he didn't pitch at all last year, which is fine. But I think he was down like 2.5 ticks and like 93 in his most recent rehab start. And he's had good results. And I'd like to think that he's probably being a little bit conservative, but I don't think that the stuff is going to look exactly like we're used to from him. So I wouldn't, start him right away in every single league format. I would be a little cautious depending on the matchup. We don't know it yet, but just putting it out there. And then with Jimenez, he's just been an absolute anvil recently. He got off to a really good start, and he's just been killing some people's teams he's hitting under 200, and it's just been really disappointing. Hopefully he can turn it around, and get back in the lineup. And then I just had to throw Sawyer Gibson-Long in there because I know it's one of Nick's favorites, one of his favorite sleeper starting pitchers. Another guy who missed last year. I think he had elbow surgery and hip surgery. So, hopefully he's the guy who flashed some good stuff in 2023. But yeah, he'll have a nice long rehab assignment. So hopefully we can get a look at what he's doing down there.
Yeah, and one thing to mention about that Tigers rotation, it's not that good either. It's okay. I think there's been some really nice bright spots there. Obviously, Tariq Google, don't need to say more about that. But Jack Flaherty has actually been pretty solid. Reese Olson's flashed some promise here and there, different starts. Casey Mize been, very, very steady. Jackson Jobe's probably just been the most disappointing. We'll talk about him in a little bit later in this pod, but obviously rookie, so he's still kind of figuring stuff out. But yeah, if Sawyer Gibson-Long turns out to be something through this rehab assignment and they like what they see, there's probably no reason for the Tigers to kind of have him get some more seasoning in AAA. He's probably ready to get called up as if they deem that he's healthy and ready to go.
Yeah, and they've been using a 6 starter. I think Keter Montero's had like 4 or 5 spot starts already. A lot of them for double headers, which they've taken advantage of. But they clearly want someone in that role, so that could be him at the least. So
yeah. All right. Yeah, that's all the news. Hopefully you caught most of that. But yeah, let's get into player performances. Patrick, start us off on Friday.
Yes, so this is a guy that I can't say I ever expected to talk about again in a fantasy context, much less have on one of my teams, which I do now. But on Friday, May 2nd, Justin Wainwright had our hitter recap, which was high Cal. A shout out to Cal Raleigh, who's been, I think, the best catcher in fantasy so far. But I'm going to talk about Javier Baez. He is now triple eligible, third base, shortstop, and outfield with the Tigers. A contract that has looked really bad so far in the few years that Baez has been up in Detroit, but he has had a hot start to the year. He on Friday the 2nd, he went 2 for 4 with a home run, a run, and 2 RBI. He's a guy that we kind of like to make fun of because he just swings at every slider in the dirt, right? And he has been miserable at the plate the last couple of years, but he's on a tear right now. He's hitting well above 300, close to 350. He's finding a lot of playing time in center field, at least before Matt Vierling comes back, who he is on rehab right now. And I have him on my team for this Coors Field series this week. I think he had 4 hits and, like 5 or 6 RBI. They sat him in the second game of the doubleheader, which is a bummer because he's on fire. I feel like you might as well ride it. But yeah, are we, what are we doing here? Are we intrigued by Javi Baez? Are we, just going to watch it from afar? Where are we at here?
I think intrigued is probably the right term. But it also like he feels like he's still a little bit of an average only play. There's some RBI and some runs in that stat in his makeup, but the guy is batting ninth for the Tigers. So the team's been hot overall. So I think if you wanna be able to get a piece of that offense and Bias is available, I don't think it's the worst idea. I think the average is incredible. Like I think it's a career high for him right now. So if
Mm-hmm.
he somehow maintains that and still can get you 50, 60 runs on the season and maybe the same number of RBI, yeah, that's probably worth grabbing in. I hesitate to say 12 teamers, but at least 15 teamers. It's actually worth a look.
Yeah, I have him in my like online championship, which is a 12 teamer, but it's 30 man roster, so it's a little bit deeper. I don't know how long I'm going to hold him. I like the triple eligibility and third base. I have Alec Boehm, who's been terrible, and Michael Garcia, who's been really good, but I like to be able to move him around. So, it's kind of a team dependent play. I don't think the batting average is going to last. He's running close to a 400 BABIP, but he is chasing less than the terrible chase rates that we've seen from him the last couple years, and he still does have like a little power speed blend. But yeah, the upside is a little bit limited, hitting ninth. I wish they'd at least bump him up a little bit while he's still hot, but it's just fun to see a guy who, is a really exciting and talented player kind of, peek back into fantasy relevance.
Yeah, peak is definitely the operative term here. There's not really a lot of relevance for Baez at this point.
Yeah, it could get ugly quick. So, just be ready to, don't get attached, be ready to cut bait. On the hit or on the pitching side, on the second, we saw a really promising debut from Gunnar Hoglund on the Athletics. He was the cover boy for Nick's SP Roundup on this day with Gunnar Hog thwarts the Marlins. Obviously, he got a great matchup to start his career, right? The Marlins, there's few better than that, but he definitely took advantage. He went 6 innings, 1 earned run, 6 hits, no walks, and 7 strikeouts with 11 whiffs and a 38% CSW on 81 pitches, and he got the win. So pretty much picture perfect. At Pitcher List, we don't start a lot of MLB debuts, or at least don't recommend it. That's kind of Nick's policy. But if people went for Hoglund here against the Marlins, it definitely worked out. So props to you. He was really strong. There's times where we see a pitcher do well against a weak team, and we just kind of don't make a lot of it because it's a bad lineup. But in this case, Nick and kind of what I've seen too is that's not what the case was here. Hoglund, he flashed some really impressive stuff. He's hitting 93, 94 with a really hoppy four-seamer, so getting close to 20 inches of IVB and almost 7 feet of extension. So a really strong fastball that kind of anchors his arsenal. And he also mixes in a sinker that can be effective with a lot of run against righties. And his secondaries are not great, but they're okay. He has a changeup that has some really nice moments, has a lot of depth to it, and plays really well with the movement differential on the fastball. So hopefully that can be a good weapon against lefties. And then he also throws in a sweeper that's kind of decent, still developing pitch. And we saw another outing from Gunnar since this really strong one. He had 5 1/3 with 2 earned runs and 3 strikeouts at home against the Mariners, who's a pretty hot offense right now, which I know we're not used to saying. But we've seen him, string together two solid outings here, one really good one and one, decent one. So where are we on Hoglund now? Are we, grabbing him everywhere we can? Do we think that he can be, a back end pitcher for our teams the rest of the year?
I mean, I think he's pretty solid as a pickup right now. The next couple days for the Athletics aren't that great. I think he might be slotted into pitch against the Dodgers, so I'd probably fade that. But yeah, the fastball's good. I think that's the main thing, right? The fastball's good. I think what his offering against same-handed batting is probably not great, right? You mentioned the slider and the sweeper. They didn't earn any whiffs in this start against the Marlins, which you'd hope to see at least against a team like the Marlins. But I think he's fine. I think he's like a guy that you'd be happy to pick up. He'll do well for a couple starts, depending on what the matchup is. The A's are pretty decent, which is kind of a weird thing to say. So he'll be able to get you some wins in wins leagues as well. So yeah, I think he's worth a pickup. He's not a guy that like is so matchup dependent that he's just going to be like on your waiver wire unless it's against like a bottom 3 team. I think he can succeed against reasonable teams. I think maybe the question I have is just what's his strikeout potential. That's probably the one thing, just because he doesn't have like a great out pitch against righties.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty fastball reliant in terms of whiff. The changeup was really good in his first outing, but in the second outing, it had similar movement, but it had I think it maybe only had 0 or 1 whiff. So it doesn't, we've seen one great outing and one bad outing, right? So, we'll get a couple more and we'll see, is that changeup really a reliable secondary for him and kind of go from there. But yeah, I don't think not starting him against the Dodgers, if that's the matchup he gets, that's just a little bit too firm of a test to be confident in right now with a guy who's only had 2 MLB starts.
Yeah, and I think the key thing to look at him in terms of like growing skills is just going to be like, can he put away guys with the breaking ball, right? Or is he just so fastball dependent that he's just reliant on that pitch to get him strikeouts?
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Saturday. Thanks to Kevin O'Brien for the Jake Even analysis hitter recap article. We're going to talk about Kyle Stowers of the Miami Marlins. Went 2 for 5 with 2 homers, 2 runs, and 6 RBI. Stowers has made the most of his opportunity in Miami. Showed that on Saturday night. Got 2 home runs, collected 6 RBI, and one of them was a game-winning grand slam off A's closer Mason Miller. Great shot there. For the year, the 27-year-old outfielder is slashing 302, 376, 509, which is an insane line. I'm sure Baltimore could use a little bit of that right now. The thing, though, with him is that he's just not an elite power hitter. He did have multiple seasons in the minors with 20-plus homers, but I think it's like 2. So multiple is even a generous term there. With him having such a hot bat, though, right now, and I should say, out of the six home runs he's hit this season, he's had two home run games. So really, like, you take out 2 games, he's only hit 2 homers for the rest of his time in the majors so far. Is he worth a pickup? I've seen a lot of helium around Stowers in terms of getting picked up in leagues right now. Or is this just 2 really good games that elevated his stats, and he doesn't really actually have a lot of great skills at the plate?
Yeah, I mean, that grand slam was super cool. On Saturday, half my Twitter feed was posts about Kyle Stowers, ranting, Orioles fans ranting about how could we let this guy go. It's great to see him succeed, but he just didn't have a runway to playing time in Baltimore. I get that Trevor Rogers was a bad return, right, with him and Norby, but it's not a guy that was, a cornerstone of our team. But he's getting a great opportunity here in Miami. I think you ride the hot hand for a little bit. I added him in a Yahoo 12-team league where my outfield is a little weak and beat up. I had Trout and Jordan hit the IL in the past week, so I needed an outfielder, and he was the best performing one, right? So I scooped him and I got that 2 home run game out of him. So I've already gotten more than I really expected. I think that he has the runway, right? He's going to be playing every day. Miami is going to give these young guys every chance, and he's been one of their best hitters, so he's going to be in there. There is a lot of swing and miss in his game, and that was always the concern as a prospect. He was running, strikeout rates close to 30% in the minors, which, if a guy strikes out that much in the minors, how much is he going to strike out in the majors? I think he's done a decent job so far keeping it in check around like 25, 26%, but the swing strike rate is it suggests a strikeout rate higher than that. So he's going to have to keep tapping into that power if he wants to, maintain, an above average batting line. So, not a full endorsement, but he's going to be playing every day. He's got some power and a little bit of speed. The Marlins lineup seems to be not terrible, but not good. So I guess a little bit better than I expected, honestly. So that should help a little bit. But yeah, I think 12-team, 3 outfield leagues, he's kind of right on the edge. Maybe you should have him on your team, but not always start him, just in case he really does absolutely break out. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on Stowers. It's just been fun to see him do well, and I think that he's definitely a viable fantasy asset in most leagues.
Yeah, similar to the discussion on Javi Baez, right? Like, Stowers got a 303 average with a 400 BABIP, so that kind of helps. He does have Xavier Edwards batting in front of him, so a lot of RBI opportunities there. He has 25 on the season so far. Of course, having a grand slam helps with that, but he does have a guy who will get on base and can score pretty much from first if there's a good enough hit ball. So. The RBIs are real. I think the RBI chance for Stowers is real. I think the rest of it, though, is the part where I'm maybe a little skeptical.
Yeah, I don't think there's not much of a batting average ceiling. I know that it looks good right now, but I don't think that's really representative of the type of player that he is.
Yeah, he batted 208 in 200 plate appearances last season, which feels a little bit closer to maybe what he actually is at. Yeah. All right, moving on to pitching. Thanks to Nick for the Here Comes the Jameson SP Roundup article. We are going to talk about Aaron Nola, who I did not like last week, but apparently the guy just turns it around because he had 6 innings, no one runs, 4 hits, 1 walk, and 8 strikeouts against Arizona in the win. Very nice sequence of 2 games. I still can't trust him yet. He went very curve heavy in this game, had some backdoor sinkers and 4-seamers up in the zone. What do you know? When you avoid the middle of the zone, that's a good recipe for success. So congratulations, Aaron Nola. You figured out pitching. That being said, he's only had 2 good starts. The rest of the season has been pretty awful. How repeatable do you think this is from Nola? Like, basically kind of the improvement in command literally is kind of what's helping him out here. Is this real, or is this just kind of a nice story and we're going to be going back to odd year Nola after a couple starts?
I mean, I don't expect him to throw 6 shutout innings against one of the best offenses in the league all that often, but I did write about him a couple of weeks ago in my Patience or Panic, and I do think that patience is the right approach. I do believe in Nola. I think his velo is slowly climbing, back to where it has been for his career, maybe slightly below. But I do believe in him. This is 2 good outings in a row now. Some of it is probably just good luck, right? It's probably evening out from some of the bad luck he was dealing with in his first few outings. But he's still striking out over a batter an inning, which for him is pretty impressive. He's usually kind of like a 8.5, maybe 9 strikeouts per 9 type guy. So yeah, I believe in him. I think that, there's just great volume there, and that's kind of his biggest asset. And he's kind of a wins and quality starts machine. So regardless of your format, he should provide some real value. He's not, maybe he's an SP3 now. He's not an SP2, right? He doesn't have that super high upside that maybe he once had, but I do like Nola. I like these, steady Eddie type guys. Maybe he's, Logan Webb comes to mind as a comp, but I think Webb has probably moved a little bit ahead of him at this point in their careers.
Yeah, I think with Nola, the fear is just the ratios won't look great, but I mean, you kind of got the junk out at the beginning of the season. And even though his stats right now don't look great, right, for the remainder of the season, maybe he has figured something out with being able to locate better and just know where your pitches are going a little bit better. And 8 strikeouts here is like kind of a lot more than I would expect from him. But like you said, the stats have actually been pretty decent in terms of the K/9 this year. Yeah, maybe something to keep monitoring. Obviously, if you have Nola, you're not dropping him. And if you're trying to trade for him, maybe it's a bad time to try to trade for him. But at the same time, maybe someone doesn't believe enough, like me.
Yeah, and I think it's more of an ERA risk specifically than a whip risk. He doesn't walk a lot of guys, and he does sometimes get hit hard. But I don't, I wouldn't be surprised to see bad ERAs from Nola, but I don't expect a bad whip.
Yeah.
So going on to Sunday the 4th, Johnny Gordon was on our hitter recap with this one, which was a shout out to Maikel Garcia, who had 2 home runs against my Orioles. Maikelling me softly with 2 bombs was Johnny's header here. Maikel Garcia has been super exciting, but I'm going to talk about someone who got off to a little bit of a slow start, but seems to be hitting their groove and also had 2 home runs on this day. which is Willy Adames, shortstop for the Giants. In this game, he went 3 for 5 with a double, 2 homers, 2 runs, and 3 RBI. He hit 2 homers and a double off the Rockies in pitcher-friendly Oracle Park. A lot of fantasy analysts were quick to identify Adames as a bust candidate, going from Milwaukee, which is pretty homer-friendly, to the Giants, which is a pretty tough place to hit. And obviously signing a big contract, a lot of pressure associated with that. It does seem like that is the case. He has scuffled a little bit out of the gates, but he hit 3 of his 4 home runs this past week. So he is starting to, show some of that 30 power upside that he showcased last year. But it does, he's running a little bit behind that pace right now. He is, kind of locked into the 2-hole in a solid but not spectacular Giants lineup. So there's going to be a lot of counting stats. He'll be a real contributor in runs and RBI. But it does seem like he maybe was a little bit overvalued going right inside the top 100 in some drafts. So, did we buy too high here on Adames, or is this just a slow start and we expect him to, be a fringe top 100 player like expected?
I think it's probably unlikely to expect him to repeat last year, right?
Yeah.
32 homers, 21 stolen bases, 100 plus RBI, 93 runs, right? Like that's he's just not getting back to that. Whether he gets at the top 100 hitter though, I think that's still very much in his range, right? If he gets like to the mid 20s in terms of homers, which he's hit the last 4 years. Now, granted, of course, he's in San Francisco, so it's a little bit harder to get to that mark, especially as a righty. As a righty, it's not that bad actually.
Probably close to neutral.
Yeah, it's probably close to neutral. So I think he probably gets to mid 20s in terms of homers. In terms of steals, I fully don't expect him to get to 21, right? He's never had more than double-digit steals in his entire career, and then last year he just popped for 21. Maybe he gets to 10, 15, just with the difference with how running is the past couple of years. Will he get to close to 100 in terms of both runs and RBI? Probably. I think that one actually there's maybe a chance to get to that point. So I think you put all that together, mid 20s homer, let's just say 90 runs and 90 RBI, like a lowish 200 average. That's probably a top 100 hitter to me. I just don't think that he's going to be the guy that everyone thought. That he's just not going to repeat last season. And if you were drafting him to expect him to repeat last season, then you definitely did buy higher than you needed to.
Yeah, and I think he was close to a top 50 player last year, so you did get a decent discount off that. But I did, I wrote a shortstop bust article for us before the season, and I had him on my list, not because I thought he was going to be terrible, but just because I just thought the price was a little too high. We're buying off a career year, and I just think you have to be a little bit wary of that, especially with the change to a less offensively friendly environment. So, Gary's still out, right? I'm not victory lapping. We'll see how it goes. I had O'Neal Cruz on my list, which looks like a bad pick so far. I had Xavier Edwards, which, looks good. Ceddanne Rafaela looks good, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's nice to see him, get back to at least a league average hitter, because he was off to a super slow start.
Yeah. And I think that's, it's, your first month in a new park, first month with the new team, right? It makes sense that you're going to have a little bit of a slow start.
Yeah. On the pitching side, on the fourth, on the other side of the spectrum, a guy who's had an unexpected, fantastic start. Our SP roundup that day from Nick was Freelance Streamer, which is, of course, a nod to the return of Lance McCullers. Not going to talk about him. We talked about him a little bit earlier, but I'm going to talk about JP Sears, who pitched at the Marlins. Another guy going against the Marlins for the Athletics. He took a no decision in this one, but he went 6 1/3, 2 earned with 4 hits, no walks, and only 2 strikeouts, 5 whiffs, and a 29% CSW on 80 pitches. I'm not talking about Sears specifically because of this outing, but more so what he's done over the course of the year. He's been shockingly good. He's got so far a 2.93 ERA, a 1 flat whip, which is excellent, 4 wins and 32 strikeouts in 40 innings. In terms of what he's actually doing, in terms of his arsenal, it doesn't seem like he's all that different in years past. And a typical Sears stat line in years past was kind of a low to mid 4s ERA and a 1.25 whip. So he's kind of the definition of a deep format streamer, maybe a Toby at best. So, it's interesting that he's doing so well. What I've seen is he kind of scrapped his sinker. He's only throwing it, 1% of the time, and has replaced that with a little bit more usage of his four seamer and sweeper. So it seems like he's leaning on his better pitches. And he's kind of locked in from a control perspective with just a 3.7% walk rate, which is excellent compared to a 6.7% career mark, which is good too. So yeah, we've seen some great results from SEARS so far. Feels like it maybe still be a little bit hard to trust, but has he at least made himself into maybe a team streamer in 12 team and shallower formats? And when I say team streamer, I mean that's a guy you keep on your team because you don't want someone else to add him, but you don't start him necessarily in every matchup.
Yeah, that characterization probably makes sense for SEARS. I think I'd still probably be willing to drop him. I think some worrying things I just noticed from just looking over his player page, right? He's had a really big jump in his called strike rate, both on his fastball and his sweeper. Sweeper jumped from 20 to almost a 29% called strike rate.
Oh wow!
While dropping 1% in swing and strike rate. Fastballs dropped from 13.3% to 6.5% swing and strike rate, and basically a similar increase in called strike rate. So he's getting away with a lot of called strikes. I don't know how much of that is just like maybe there was one start where he got a ton of called strikes and that's what's messing with the data here. The fact that he got 2 strikeouts against Miami is maybe a little disappointing. The weird thing with SEARS is that he's just a guy that PLV loved for a long time.
Yeah.
Would like elevate a lot in and I know like PLV based projections, but he just hasn't really been able to return that. So I think where I have SEARS right now is that like, yeah, feel free to stream him if it makes sense. I think he's maybe getting a little lucky.
Yeah,
I have nothing to back that other than these called strike numbers, which just seems so weird that they've jumped so much, and that his whiff rate has dropped so much, and he's still earning relatively decent numbers. It just doesn't feel sustainable to me.
Yeah, I mean, most of the ERA estimators have him, mid to high threes, so maybe he's improved a little bit, but not as much as the line suggests. I was just looking at his matchups. It seems like he has had things pretty easy. Just running them real quick here. At Seattle to start the year when the Mariners' offense was terrible, so that's a good matchup. At Coors, which isn't a bad matchup these days. Home against the Mets, which has probably been his toughest one. And then it was at White Sox, home and away with the Rangers, who have been one of the worst offenses in the league, and Miami, who's also a bad offense. So he's arguably had one difficult matchup out of 7 or 8 so far out of 8. So, maybe he's just making the most of that while he's on a really nice command run. So he gets to the Yankees this weekend. I don't know how that's going to look. So, we'll get a sense of if he's really in a good spot right now with that one.
Yeah, but it is probably worth keeping him on your team if you do have him, right? Because you're not going to start him against the Yankees, maybe, but you want to see how that goes. Because if he does well, then maybe there is actually maybe this change is actually real and not just a weird data blip in his makeup. All right, moving on to Monday's games. Thanks to Christian Odman for the Contreras to popular belief hitter recap article. But we were going to talk about HYSEONG Kim, who we briefly mentioned earlier. Went 2 for 4 with a run, an RBI, and a stolen base in his major league debut in the field as a Los Angeles Dodger. I think HYSEONG Kim definitely went under the radar because of the whole Roki Sasaki sweepstakes, but the Dodgers did pick up another international free agent. He's got a lot of speed. He's made his major league debut as a pitch runner on Sunday, but started for the first time on Monday. And he started in 3 straight games so far, has been batting in the 9-hole for 2 of those games, then 8-hole for 1 of those games, which conveniently in the Dodgers offense means that he's actually batting in front of Shohei Ohtani, which is pretty nice. He's not really a power hitter by any means, did not have that many homers in the KBO, but he is a little bit of a speed merchant. He stole 30 bags in the KBO last year. Dodgers are definitely going to kind of utilize him for defense and for speed while Tommy Edman is out. With that all being said, is he someone that makes sense to pick up in like a 12-team or a 15-team league, or is he kind of just better left on the waiver wire? I don't know. What are your thoughts about guys who kind of excel in maybe just one category, specifically steals?
Yeah, I mean, I generally am a little bit reluctant to roster those guys, but it's more from the sense of I don't want to invest a lot of draft capital in them. I don't mind, having them on my team as a short-term play. He has the double second base shortstop eligibility, which is nice, and it seems like he's at least platooning. So I think yeah, he's a nice playing while he's playing type guy. It seems like the Dodgers are pretty optimistic on return timelines for Edman and for Teoscar. So we don't know how long the playing time is going to be there. But while he is starting, I think he's worth having. You know, the Dodgers like to keep veterans on their bench, and those are guys who aren't really threats to steal playing time from starters. You know, guys like Chris Taylor and Miguel Rojas. You know, they're not going to take much time from him. I was a little concerned when he sat the first game or two, but it seemed like they were just getting him acclimated, and they've had him out there for 4 straight games. So yeah, he's a good short term play. I don't think you should go trade for him or anything like that, but yeah, he's a good short term speed play.
Yeah, if you're looking for a guy that, like, let's just say you did get Chandler Simpson, right, and you're still looking for someone
Mm-hmm.
like with speed, and it's got decent hit tool. Yeah, Hisaka might be a good option there.
Yeah.
Moving on to pitching, thanks to Nick for the Sears Hunter SB Roundup article. But we are going to talk about AJ Smith-Shawver, who pitched 8 innings, no 1 runs, 1 hit, 4 walks, and 5 strikeouts against the Reds. Yeah, he absolutely cooked. That being said, his pitches just really weren't that great. His four-seamer, pretty average shape, 6.9 feet of extension, 15.1 inches of IVB, had a ton of called strikes. 11 out of 12 balls in play also ended in outs. The splitter was pretty meh, only had 4 out of 29 whiffs. Other breaking pitches pretty much didn't do anything. I think the one important stat about this start, 52% ground ball rate, which is dramatically different than any of his other starts. He usually averages in the high 30s to low 40% ground ball rate. So ultimately, I don't really buy this as a sustainable path forward. He was just facing, a weak Reds lineup away from Cincinnati. I don't really know if this is what we would come to expect from Smith-Shawver. But Patrick, what do you think? Like, he's probably going to be in the rotation for a while longer. Is this a guy who you'd still be interested in picking up in a fantasy team, or is he still more of a streamer?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risk there, specifically whip risk. You know, I think that the BABIP gods, Koufax, as Nick says, they were kind of in his favor in this one, obviously, with only 1 hit on 5 strikeouts. So especially because he's a guy that we've seen struggle to get through 5 innings in the past. So it's nice to see him take this step forward, but it's not really clear how much of it was a skills growth and how much of it was just a good outing. It's nice to see, and for people who had him in this 2-start week, hopefully he spends another good outing this weekend and you get a ton out of him. But I don't think that he, is establishing himself as like a must roster starting pitcher. I think that he could be one a year or two down the road. He's still really young, even though we've seen him in, I think, maybe 3 different major league seasons right now because of
Yeah, he's made
how
a lot of random
fast. Yeah.
appearances.
The Atlanta is just, if someone seems good in the minor leagues, they shove him up. And I guess it worked with Schwellenbach and Strider, right? And maybe he'll be the next iteration of that. But I don't want to start him in difficult matchups because I saw him on Sunday Night Baseball against the Padres like a month or two ago, and his stuff's nasty, but he struggles to get outs consistently and really command his stuff. So I think there's definitely some whip risk and maybe a little bit of ERA risk too. So on Tuesday, the 6th, May 6th, we were moving to. Scott McDermott was on our hitter recap with a shout out to Austin Wells, who I think had a multi-homer game in this one. But I'm going to talk about a really slow starter, one of the worst hitters in the league in the month of April, to be honest. It was Alec Boehm. I think he's first base and third base eligible in Yahoo formats at least. I think maybe just third base and some other formats. But on this day, he went 1 for 3 with a home run, which was his first of the season. A run scored and 2 RBI. He was one of 5 qualifying players going into the 6th without a home run, but he went yard off Drew Rasmussen. It wasn't a bomb at 342 feet and 97.2 mile per hour exit velo, but he got off the schneid. His underlying metrics actually do look pretty good in terms of expected stats versus actual production, and he's been a nice 15 to 20 homer guy with a good batting average in years past. But his slugging has completely plummeted, and his OPS last year was 780, and he's down to well below 600 right now. So Scott kind of is predicting a bounce back here, even though there's nothing in his approach that looks all that different. But he has dropped to 8th in the lineup, which is going to hurt his run production. So he feels like a guy who's kind of on the periphery. He's fringe in our shallower formats right now. I actually cut him and then picked him back up just because I didn't have a better option. It was for Kyle Manzardo, so felt like a kind of a 50-50 call. But yeah, where are we on Boehm? Are we do we expect a breakout coming soon, or are we a little bit pessimistic?
I think with Bohm, I already had him as like a fringe guy, like
Mhm.
to start draft season out. So the fact that he's not necessarily returning on like let's just say a top 12 third baseman performance is not the most surprising thing.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean in terms of his metrics, like he's hitting the ball about just as hard. Decent average exit velocities. Barrel rate's actually kind of in line with where it's been the past couple seasons. So there's a little bit of being unlucky there. Right now, his BABIP is a 284 compared to a career of 315. So there's a little
Yeah,
bit
because he's
of
like a line drive hitter. Mhm.
yeah. So there's a little bit of unluckiness there. Um, but at the same time, it's like if you had Bohm on your teams, it's like what were you expecting, right? Kind of the line that you just mentioned, right? 15 to 20 homers, decent amount of runs and RBI, maybe like a high 200s average or mid to high 200s average. I think he probably could get back there, but even if he does, it's like big whoop. That's not exactly the needle mover
Yeah.
that we need in fantasy. So I think once he gets back, if this is kind of like the hey he's looking good, like yeah, he's probably worth a pickup if the who you have at third base isn't that great right now.
Yeah, I do think the lineup spot change lowers his ceiling a lot, unfortunately. But yeah, I think that he is going to turn around to some extent. And on the pitching side for this day, we had another slow starter that I want to talk about. Nick's SP roundup on this day was scoring a Patrick, which was a shout out to Chad Patrick, who strung together a lot of strong outings for Milwaukee, kind of out of nowhere. But I don't want to talk about him. I want to talk about Chris Sale, who went against Cincinnati at home, which is a good matchup. He had a no decision, but he did go 6 2/3 scoreless innings with 5 hits, 2 walks, and 10 strikeouts, 18 whiffs, and a 38% CSW. And they let him go 112 pitches. So that's 20 strikeouts now across Sale's last 2 outings with only 2 earned runs. And his slider has really kind of been the key. In this one, he had a 44% CSW across 62 sliders. So he is really leaning into that wicked offering. Co-share the Gallows poll here, and Nick's, hinting at 1 or 2 more strong outings, and he could get that AGA tag back. So that's nice to see, especially because I drafted him as my SP1 in a league. But it does seem like he's taken a little bit of a step back from his Cy Young form last year, which I guess was expected, right? He went 18-3 with a 2.38 ERA and a 1.01 WHIP. So that would have been unreasonable to expect him to repeat. But it's nice to see him at least getting back to being a potential ace level pitcher.
Yeah, with Sale, it just seems like he's been a little bit more hittable this year, which has led to more runs. Right, his strikeout rates dipped a tiny bit, but it's like 32% to 30%. So
Right,
nothing
not much
super alarming
change.
there. Walk rate is essentially unchanged, but the difference is his hits per nine have increased by 3 compared to last season. And really, actually, it's a high for his career. So I kind of would expect some regression to his mean, which would be only a good thing. Other than that, like the stuff looks fine. There's nothing too concerning about here. So, yeah, pretty excited to see some good results from Sale. After maybe a little bit of unluckiness, 380 BABIP, right? That's kind of high.
Yeah.
A little bit higher, home run per fly ball rate. Like again, I'm kind of with you. Like to assume that he'd get back to the Cy Young form is probably unrealistic, but we know what Chris Sale is, perfectly capable of, and a start like this is basically what you would hope to expect from him against pretty weak opposition.
Yeah, crazy that they couldn't get him a win. I mean, he had 18 last year and 1 so far this year. That's gonna hurt. I don't think that Atlanta is just gonna suddenly become the team that we thought they were gonna be. They've clearly taken a step back. So you might not get the 15 that you were expecting from him. But I think from a skills perspective, he's still a 3 ERA. Pushing 200 strikeout type guy. He just needs to get the whip down a little bit, which hopefully he continues to chip away at.
Yeah, 1.42 whip. That's pretty high,
Mm.
and it doesn't really make sense why he's a little bit more hittable this year. The average on his average against on his fastball and his changeup have been pretty high this year, relatively speaking, compared to past years. So maybe there's something there. His fastball is maybe a tiny bit more hittable.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to Wednesday. Thanks to Kyle Stansel for the Howdy Willier hitter recap article. But we are going to talk about Jeremy Pena of the Astros, 2 for 5 with a home run, a double, 2 runs, and 4 RBI. Pena finished last year as the 13th best shortstop in fantasy last season. This year, right now he's the 10th best, so maybe a tiny bit of improvement. He's been showing a little bit more plate discipline though, dramatically cutting down his strikeout rate, 3 percentage points, increasing the walk rate about 3 percentage points. This is resulting in a pretty good slash line: 279, 340, 434. All those numbers are better than last year right now. The problem, of course, is that he plays in this Houston offense that just really has not been good. Jordan's on the shelf, as we mentioned. Kyle Tucker is no longer in Houston. Altuve is still figuring out how to play outfield. I guess that's also playing into how he's approaching the plate, because he has to be moved to the second spot to give him more time to basically run in from the outfield, which I think is a really funny reason, considering that literally only happens probably once a game, but it is what it is. Yeah, just the offense for Houston is just not that great, and it's at least nice to see a little bit of spark from Pena in this start. But maybe kind of in a similar vein to Alec Boehm, right? He's kind of like the fringe guy in 12 teamers, where he's probably on your roster, but you could make a good reason to not draft him. Is Pena a guy, now that he's batting leadoff, a lock to be in 12 teamers, or is he still a guy that like maybe bounces between the waiver wire and a team, just kind of depending on who's available and who's hot and who's not?
Yeah, I think I like him more than Bohm. I think he is a lock. If I saw someone drop him in my league, my one of my 12 teamers, I have Corey Seager as my shortstop. I would still add Jeremy Pena because I think he's that good of a player. It speaks to the depth of the shortstop position these days that a guy who could go 2020 and hit 270 is not a top 10 shortstop. I mean, that just shows you how talented these guys are and how good they are from a fantasy perspective. But yeah, he's an everyday leadoff guy who offers kind of steady across the board contribution. The counting stats, like you said, are not what you hoped, but I think that they can get going once Jordan gets back. Obviously you can't replace Kyle Tucker, but I think that Jordan's going to get going. I think he was he was obviously a little bit banged up, but also just luck not being on his side. So yeah, I think that Pena's a hold. Hopefully in some leagues where you kind of quote unquote punted shortstop, you went with Pena as kind of a later option, and you built a really solid team around him.
Yeah. All right, moving on to pitching. Thanks to Nick for the "Should We Care for Job" SP Roundup article, and we were talking about Jackson Jobe. Not a good start this one. 3.2 innings, 6 earned runs, 8 hits, 1 walk, and only 2 strikeouts. Yeah, I've personally been holding on to Jobe in a couple of my fantasy teams. I feel like I'm ready to pull the plug, though, because this was facing the Rockies in Colorado, which, isn't necessarily the best option, but it is also an option that you could definitely take advantage of. And yeah, Jobe just couldn't do much. He had really poor location on his fastballs, really couldn't get going with any of his other breaking pitches. Gave up a couple homers in this one, I believe. So that all being said, we know the skills from Jobe are elite, right? If you give him the pass for breaking pitches not looking good in Colorado, I'd be willing to accept that as an excuse. But is he worth holding on to for the time being, or would you look somewhere else for some pitching help right now?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. I don't have Job on any team, so I obviously have been attuned to how he's been struggling, and it's been disappointing and kind of a little bit mystifying because he has a super deep arsenal and all the pitches kind of look good on their own, but he seems to be just kind of struggling to string it together. He's only 22, right? Like he's super young. He's probably one of the youngest pitchers in the league. So it's asking a lot to hold your own at the major league level at that age, much less thrive. So we might just be a year too early here. I think that could be the case. Like I said, I'm not a Job owner, so I'm not, considering Job versus, I don't know, JP Sears or, that's the first guy who comes to mind. Like that would stink to have to make that move, but it's possible that it would be better for your team in the long run. I think I'd still want to see it out just a little bit longer. But they've been skipping his turns a little bit, and he is a little bit limited because he only threw 95 innings last year. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets bumped to a bullpen role to prepare him for an important playoff, position because the Tigers have a really solid top of the rotation. So I don't think you need to cut right away, but I wouldn't fault you. Unfortunately, it has been a disappointing season.
Yeah, I think one challenge with Jobe too is just how inefficient he is. There's been multiple starts where he's not eligible for the win, even though the Tigers are, at least last I checked, the best team in the AL. So yeah, with Jobe, it's just kind of tough to hold him in a fantasy context because he's not returning as much as maybe you'd like him to. Um, but yeah, I think the other risk is that like the Tigers end up kind of moving him into the bullpen maybe halfway through the season. Maybe someone comes up for the minors who they're willing to be a starter, and they're like, yeah, we'll rest Joe for a little bit because he's still super young, which makes him a little bit harder to hold on a fantasy team if you can't guarantee that he's going to be pitching every 5 days essentially.
Yeah, and the Tigers have a ton of long relievers that you've never heard of that are effective. So they are just like they're not afraid to pull a guy after 4 innings and cover 2 innings with one guy and then go with a 3 inning save after that. So it is it's frustrating how they're handling it, but they're really effective at winning games. So you can't really fault the approach.
Yeah. In 6 starts so far this season, Jobe has made it past 5 innings in half of them, so at least he's been eligible for the win in half his starts. But they're not necessarily pulling him because he's like going super deep. They're still pulling him at like mid 70s, mid 80s pitches. I don't think his pitch count has gone above 90 at all in any of these starts, so they're still clearly limiting him in small little ways that can be annoying for fantasy managers.
Yeah, maybe he could be like a post-hype sleeper next year, but I get the sense that he's such a big name that his stock probably won't fall all that far.
Right. We'll hear some great news in spring training, and he'll be right back. All right, that's going to wrap it up for the player performances. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by Pitcher List writer Adam Solorio to talk about Max Meyer. And we're back from break, and we are now joined by Pitcher List writer Adam Solorio to talk about his article, How Max Meyer Revamped His Arsenal. Definitely an interesting topic, especially considering the past couple of performances from Max Meyer. But before we jump into it, Adam, how are you doing? Welcome to the show.
It's been going great, guys. It's I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, actually, I looked it up. I think you were exactly here about a year ago on the pod. So great timing for the 1 year anniversary. We'll be sure to call you up in early May next year to talk about some more pitchers.
Hey, that sounds great. Let's book it.
Yeah. Before we jump in, though, why don't you just give the listeners just kind of a little rehash of who you are, maybe what baseball teams you root for, kind of just baseball interests in general. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been interested, like all of us. I've been obsessed with baseball my whole life, and a few years ago, I started to write about it. Write about advanced metrics behind the game. I've always loved pitching, pitch design, really, and there's so much ground to cover in terms of all the metrics that are available in this present time. And so, started writing on Substack for a little bit. Joined the website last year on Going Deep, and I write every week on the Going Deep section. I am a Red Sox fan. We've been, hovering around 500 this year. Excited for Anthony and Meyer to be called up eventually this year.
Yeah,
I'm very excited. I'm counting down the days to it. The days in my head, I guess. I don't know, but hopefully it comes soon. And that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. We are going to talk about your article on Max Meyer, but I definitely want to recommend listeners. Adam's got a bunch of articles on pitchers coming out. I know you had one recently on Roki Sasaki that was pretty interesting. But Max Meyer, a man near and dear to my heart as a fellow Minnesotan, and I've been big on him this year. Unfortunately, he decided to have a couple duds, which we'll talk about later in this interview. But let's talk about his arsenal, because that's the thing that you focus on in this article. And specifically, let's talk about the arsenal before 2025. Meyer's always been known for the slider, right? That was his pitch coming out of college. That was kind of the reason he was getting drafted. But what were some of his other pitches that showed that maybe some work was needed, right, in his brief appearance in 2022 before going on Tommy John, or maybe what he was showing in the minors? What was Meyer's arsenal looking like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he had pretty much a classic. He had the 4-seam fastball, slider, and a changeup. It was a pretty standard mix. And the changeup was, okay offering. And obviously, he always had that dominant slider. I mean, up to 90s. It's a bullet slider. Always has been able to generate some swing and miss against both righties and lefties. But the 4-seam fastball, he threw it about 95 miles per hour. He still does today. But it really was in great shape. He averaged about 10 inches of induced vertical break on the offering, which is well below average for a pitcher of almost any arm angle. And it really didn't get great results on it before this year. In his rookie year, sure, it's a very small sample size. He only pitched in 2 games before he got injured. It had a whiff rate of 5%, which is well below average for a four-seam fastball. And it really made him very vulnerable to damage against hitters of both-handedness. So that was really a key point that he had to improve on in order to reach his true ceiling as a top 100 prospect. He was throughout his career in the minor leagues. And that was really his main point of change he had to make before his breakout this year.
So basically, it's like the fastball was the thing that was holding him back, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know that slider. I mean, we're going to talk about movement profiles in a little bit, but the slider, the bullet slider specifically, is like a perfect pitch in the sense that like the drop exactly mirrors like how you would expect. There's basically just like no induced movement because of that slider and how he throws it, which like why is that a good thing? I guess like you know what, that's one of the things that I've been kind of learning this year about induced movement is understanding like the difference between bullet sliders and, you know, the sweepers that maybe we usually think of sliders as. For a pitch to have no movement on it or just no induced movement on it, why is that a good thing?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Like especially the offering that Meyer has. He's able to use it to both righties and lefties. You know, for example, you look at a big sweeping slider. You know, you look at like a Michael King slider or Ottavino slider. It's really only able to be thrown to hit batters at the same handedness, just because of the big action on the pitch, and which makes it easier to locate against hitters of, you know, you can locate it outside the zone for chase. You know, if he was throwing that to a lefty, okay, you can locate it outside the zone. You might hit the batter, or it might leak out, you know, over the heart of the plate and get crushed. A bullet slider, you know, it's a tighter shape. It could almost have, you know, I'm kind of careful using the word like drop. Usually that's associated with like a changeup, but it can almost kind of have like a falling off the table effect on an opposite-handed hitter that could be really useful down in the zone. And that's really what Meyer has used to his advantage during his career. He really hasn't had wide splits between righties and lefties. I don't have him in front of me now, but I think his K minus walk rate is pretty much the same against righties and lefties this year. So it really helps him. It's a good breaking ball shape to use against both types of hitters, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm looking at, you know, on our player pages, the movement profile of the slider versus the fastball, and the fastball on its own, not a great pitch, right? But, you know, 15 inches of IVB about, and the slider does have a couple inches of depth. I think it's like -3 inches of IVB, and it's only 5 miles per hour slower than the fastball. So he's creating, you know, 1.5 foot of vertical movement differential in such a tight window. So that's got to be, you know, really hard for hitters to kind of distinguish between those two pitches.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it ties into, I think it helps him tunnel the pitches better too. I don't think we have metrics at the site that talk about, you know, those effects between the pitches, but other sites do. And, you know, I'm just kind of speculating, but, you know, if you have two different pitches that look similar out of hand, like that slider and fastball, especially at that same velocity, they could really just disappear in a hitter, especially if he's locating that slider down and fastball at a location that tunnels well. So it's truly, it was always graded as a 60 as a prospect. I mean, I can't go back in time, and, you know, that's not really how that works, evaluating a prospect, but it wouldn't surprise. It's kind of like a 70, honestly. So it's a good pitch.
Yeah, especially if he can command it. And I know that a lot of the focus of the article is repertoire changes, but you also talk about a change in arm angle, which I feel like has been really popular, a popular point of discussion recently. There's been a lot of publicly available data coming out, you know, about how arm angle relates to movement, including from, you know, our analytics guy, Kyle Bland. Also, Max Bay has done some great work on it. So I'm wondering how arm angle relates to movement, and how does that kind of apply to Max Meyer and the changes we've seen in his arm angle in the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's really been a exciting new metric that's been out in the public, you know, the past, let's say it was probably released over last summer, and it's really led to some really interesting research. How I usually think about arm angle is I think of, you know, usually the arm angle of the pitcher sets the expectation for the batter on what the pitcher's movement profiles are going to be. Usually, I always give the example. If you have a over the top arm angle, usually you have a north-south arsenal. I think of Nick Pavetta as like a top example of this. He has a high ride fastball, kind of a tight slider, 12-6 curveball, and just I don't think Pavetta has a changeup, but usually they have changeups. And then if you have like a 3/4 arm slide, usually you go sinker, cutter, sweeper, curveball. Really, where the value comes, with generating swing and miss, ground balls, or in pitch models, is if a pitcher's movement is able to deviate from that expected movement profile from the arm angle. I look at Pavetta. He throws a sweeper from an over the top arm angle. It really fools hitters. It's always had a high whiff rate, and when he first threw it, it was like untouchable because hitters were not expecting it. With pitchers with a lower arm slide, you look at Christian Javier. His four-seam fastball, especially back in his prime, before he lost some velocity, was untouchable because it had more vert than expected in a flat angle. As it pertains to Meyer, usually arm angle also dictates the movement on your pitch. If you have a higher arm angle, you typically get more vert on your four-seam fastball. And I hypothesize that that's probably what he was chasing last season to improve his four-seam shape. I know as a rookie, he had a 37-degree arm angle. Last year, it raised dramatically up to 46, and it's dipped back down this year, back down to his range as a rookie. It's at 37, I believe. And I think last year he really adjusted that to chase vert. Whether that was successful or not is up for debate. It's performed better this year, so I would argue no. But it's really, but he's really reverted back down to his lower arm angle that he displayed in the past. And I think it also gets back to a topic that usually I've heard in the past that pitchers have like a natural arm angle that suits their body best. It's kind of diving into information that we don't have on the public side, so I don't want to, speculate. I wish we had that data public, but it probably never will. But so I think the Marlins decided to have him go back to his natural arm angle, probably to improve his health is probably a guess. And it also helps him develop better shapes on his sinker and changeup, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Yeah, and I think that idea of arm angle is really interesting. I was always, as a pitcher, and I was always told your arm angle should be the same as kind of the angle of your shoulders. It should match, as you're coming through and releasing the ball, just from a efficiency and also I think a health perspective. And I think that idea of chasing vert is also interesting. I think that we're seeing less people chase vert just for the sake of vert because we have a better understanding of fastballs, and we know that it's not all about IVB. It's also how much extension you have, how low you're releasing from, right? And obviously how hard you're throwing. So if you have a little less IVB, but you're releasing lower, you're going to create a good angle on the pitch. So I think it's definitely become a more nuanced discussion, which is cool.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot more nuanced now than it was. I mean, even I started writing like 2 or 3 years ago, and it's even more nuanced since then. It's really this new arm angle data has really been interesting. And even that idea of raising your angle to chase vert, it makes sense if you view vert in isolation, like just more vert is always good. But if it's an equal trade-off, is it really a positive? In terms of pitch models, maybe not. It's perhaps an interesting question to explore in the future, but that's where you can run into trouble. Like you look at Chris Flexen. He always had like 18 inches of vert on his fastball, and you would just look at that vert number and say, whoa, he's best fastball in the game or something. He's dominant. And then it's like, oh, he's actually like a 60-degree arm angle, and he's directly over the top. That's actually below average for his arm angle, Yeah.
And he throws so slow that it has lots of time to, gain that IVB.
Exactly. So yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, okay. So it's actually 16, whatever. But yeah, so it's very nuanced and it's exciting in many ways, but yeah, it's a pretty deep topic.
I think it really speaks to the original idea, which is like it's better to be different, right, than to necessarily just have like the perfect fastball shape sort of thing, right? It's if what you are throwing does not match the batter's expectations, that already gives you a little bit of an edge going into the at bat, as opposed to if you were throwing stuff just as expected. I know Alex Chamberlain over at Fangraphs, and also at the Pitch Leaderboard, had a really interesting article come out, I think last week, that I understood like maybe 30% of it, which was talking about I think that the focus of the article was Andres Munoz, but it was really about this idea of how different are you than what your expected arsenal is. And kind of dead zone and these different dynamic dead zone, all these different random phrases that have like really come into the public vernacular on this type of understanding baseball stats. And just reading it, I was like, oh, this makes sense in the idea that like you just want to be different, right? If your pitches are different enough, that will give you an edge in succeeding. And then you obviously want to have good pitches, but if they're at least different than what the batter's expecting, that already helps you out. Initially, than just having like a really elite pitch.
Yeah, I mean that's the goal of pitching. At the end of the day, is to keep the hitters off balance and try to get them to make bad swings and swing and miss and make weak contact. So as long as you do something that the batter's not expected, it works. I mean,
Right. All right. So going back to the fastball, we already kind of talked a little bit about the induced vertical break, about how back in 2022 it was 10.7 inches. Now in 2025, it's at 14.8 inches, basically around the 15-inch mark. So definitely a dramatic difference in the IVB. The one thing you mentioned too is also the change in arm side run, which I think just looking at these numbers like seems very dramatic, right? He in 2022, 2.4 inches of arm side run. In 2025, 9.8 inches of arm side run, like basically over a half a foot of run difference on a pitch. Yeah, how does that help? Like, why? What do both these parameters, induced vertical break and arm side run, what do those both indicate in terms of fastball shape? And how did Max, gain those types of improvements between 2022 and now?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely made a difference in the results he's got in his fastball. It's still, I mean, many would still regard it as not an average pitch. It's probably slightly below average, but he's still, like with the vert in particular, he's really improved the whiff rate on the pitch. Like I said earlier, it was 5% whiff rate his rookie year, up to 13.8 last year. It's at 15.6, still below average, but it's better than it was before. So I think the Marlins would definitely take that as a win for the improvement in his four-seamer. What's really interesting about his arm angle this year matching his arm angle in his rookie year, it's pretty easy to compare year to year. Like, oh wow, his fastball like really changed 5 inches of vert. Like what happened? And it seems to be a common answer here where it's not really public information, but which is unfortunate. But it's I think he probably had a grip change on his four-seamer. It reminds me last year of Weaver with the Yankees, Luke Weaver.
Oh yes.
And he increased his fastball vert by I think 2 inches off the top of my head, while keeping the same arm angle, which was very interesting. And Lance Brozdowski posted a video about it last year, and he suggested that there was probably a fastball grip that was done by Weaver to improve his fastball shape. And he showed images about how he changed his fastball grip, and that resulted in the shape. I would guess that was probably what has led to this improvement. I mean, since there's not a change in velocity, same arm angle, you can even see on Savant his observed spin axis and his spin-based spin axis, which is the axis differential of his pitch, has changed from both years, which does suggest that perhaps there's different seam effects occurring on the baseball. So to make a long story short, I think it really is a grip change, and that's really led to, I think, one of the best fastball transformations in recent memory. I mean, keeping arm angle constant. I can't quite recall someone that has added 5 inches of vert to the same arm angle, absent of, a sticky substance, for example. But I can't really picture of a change like that. It's been pretty impressive.
Yeah, kind of. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it's all this like magic terminology that like we just don't have right now. That it would be really nice to know about, like, yeah, how like finger pressure, it's just random stuff like that we're just never probably ever going to get. But it is fun to postulate and think about, what is the change that's happening here, that the arm angle's been consistent, but the vert has changed by such a dramatic amount.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. And I don't know if that data will ever become available to the public. It's kind of nuanced stuff, and it gets personal in some areas too. Like, oh, like how does your limb move in this direction with this? Like, okay, it's kind of like a HIPAA violation at this point, but man, I wish that was available to the public, because we would really have some pretty solid answers to how these greater improvements can occur.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think that he was probably throwing like basically a cutter, as his fastball prior to, at least in 2022. But yeah, it's interesting because Meyer, he's really broadened his arsenal, which is something you talk about in the article. He's taken, he's developed a sinker and a sweeper that basically never featured before, and he now throws them, a little over 10% of the time. The slider still, leads the way, near 40% usage. And he's really, while improving the shape on the four-seamer, cut down the usage like almost in half, just because it's not a great pitch for him, at least compared to his other stuff. So, I'm kind of wondering if if he's testing the limits of how far you can go with the mediocre fastball, or if you think he should maybe even probably not cut the pitch, because it's hard to not throw a four-seamer, but just continue to reduce its usage, just because his other 4 pitches just seem to really be, just a little bit stronger, I would say.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you there, that he probably could benefit from to try and dial back on the four seam a little bit, especially because, like you said, it is below average shape at the end of the day, and he's really added a sinker to his arsenal, which is a really good pitch in my opinion. It gets a good amount of separation to his four seamer at the same amount of velocity, which is pretty impressive. As a supinator, it does appear like he does cut, like you said, he does cut his pitches and cut his fastball. I'd be interested if he also added a cutter. I think that could put less pressure on the four seamer against lefties, because it's better to use a cutter against the hitter of the opposite handedness. So he could go four seam cutter, change up slider to lefties. It sounds about good, and four seam sinker, slider sweeper to righties. I think that'd be a good mix. I think it could increase his ability to generate swing and miss. It'll help the fastball play up, because the fastball would be masked better by the other fastballs. And it could probably even induce more weak contact against left-handed hitters. So fastball improvements have been good. I wouldn't mind him adding an extra fastball and still trying to dial back on the four-seamer. I think it could make him elevate his performance even more.
In talking about kind of the other pitches, right, and you kind of already mentioned it, just with different arsenals towards different handedness batters. The two pitches really that he's really upped the usage on this year is the sinker and the sweeper, right? So the sweeper he's been using a lot more against righties, and then he's been using the changeup more against lefties. But is the sinker also kind of a tool he's been bringing in this season against lefties, or is that more of a thing that he's just been adding across the board?
Yeah, he's been mostly using the sinker against righties. He's used against right-handed pitchers. He's used it more than his fastball against right-handed hitters. But against lefties, it's really been down to, it was before his last start against the Athletics, he used a sinker about 2% of the time to left-handed hitters. So it's pretty much been exclusively used against righties. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the topic of having more than one fastball in your arsenal. It's very, very beneficial for pitchers, I think, even if you have a good fastball. I mean, you see Tyler Glasnow add a sinker last year to his arsenal, and he is one of the best four-seamers in the game. And it really adds, going back to hitters' expectations. it really complicates the hitter's thought process in the box if you have more than one fastball as a pitcher. Let's go back to Meyer as a rookie. He had four-seamer slider. Okay, if I was a hitter, I'm probably going to sit on the four-seamer upstairs, just wait for it to come, and because it's a well below average pitch, I'm going to crush it. And then if a slider comes, early in the count, I might take it, or later in the count, I know what it is because he only has two main pitches. Now with the sinker, or with a multiple fastball in general, that just adds a whole new element to that equation. Now the hitter has to guess which fastball it is, in addition to seeing what fastball it is. And that leads to suboptimal contact and swing and miss. So if he can add that element of a cutter against lefties, allows him to toggle down the four-seamer against lefties the same way he did against righties, I think it's a great move for Meyer if he was able to do that.
Yeah, I think we're at an interesting point in pitching, and obviously this is a longer conversation, but I feel like a few years ago, it was super streamlined arsenals. It was like, these are your three best pitches, throw these three pitches. And now it's like, okay, those are your best pitches, but we want to add some wrinkles to induce weak contact and keep guys off it. So now I feel like I'm seeing more guys throw 5-6 pitches than I have in quite some time. And I guess that's maybe why the batting average, keeps dropping down, but it seems like Meyer is definitely leading into that trend here.
Yeah, I mean it's funny how it moves like in a cycle like that almost, it seems like, because I mean I remember even just a couple of years ago, that was like the part you would start with is which pitch should a pitcher like throw less, as if like, oh, he's throwing the wrong fastball. Now it seems like that doesn't really exist, the wrong fastball. It's just try to throw as many fastballs as he can, as long as it's not a super bad shape. Then obviously it's pretty bad, but yeah, it moves in a cycle, and I guess that's the beauty of it. The game is certainly not solved, and it probably never will be. I mean, there's always going to be adjustments to pitching and hitting, and it's why it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. With Meyer, it's funny. It shows you that he's still a young guy, but obviously very promising, because he has that dominant outing that I think we talked about a couple weeks ago on the podcast, John, where he goes 6 scoreless innings with 14 strikeouts.
Yep.
And then the next outing, he goes 4 innings and gives up 5 runs to the Mariners, and then 5 innings, 5 runs to the Athletics right after that. So, there's still some ups and downs despite these really promising improvements. So I'm wondering, where that kind of left you, or what your thoughts were. Obviously there was some regression coming, but, did this dampen your enthusiasm with Meyer at all? Or do you feel like you're still, really on board? What was your reaction?
Yeah, I was like, of course he's gonna have a bad outing. Like the day my article comes out, I said, "Oh, geez, this is gonna be great." It's like, oh, geez. But so after I saw that, and just after I got over my initial like just shock over it, I was so I checked how his outing went, and I saw he had 5 earned runs and 3 homers. So I figured I would just look at the home runs and see if there was anything, special about him, or, anything that could reveal what was happening in the game against the Athletics. And he gave up 3 home runs. All of them were on 2 strikes, which I thought was pretty interesting. And all of them were on sliders too, which really kind of got my interest, because the slider is his best pitch, as we've talked about. So I looked up his usage rates of the pitches in various counts before the game against the Athletics. And leading up to that game against the A's, in 2 strike counts against righties, he used his slider over 60% of the time in 2 strike counts to righties. And against lefties, he used his sliders 64% of the time.
Wow.
Which I think is just a flashing light to hitters that if you're in 2 strikes against me, I'm going to throw you the slider. So that was definitely a kind of a flashing light that maybe he's using the pitch too much in 2 strikes, especially with a guy with a wider arsenal now. I was kind of surprised to see his usage that high in those counts. And it seems like the A's planned for that. Obviously, those 3 home runs were in those count states against that pitch. But entering that game, his whiff rate on his slider was around 50%, which is great. And in that game against the A's whiffed 8.3% of the time against the slider. So it definitely seemed like they were definitely sitting on the pitch. Against the four-seamer as well, they did not whiff a single time against his four-seam fastball,
Wow.
which maybe he was tipping. I didn't have time to watch the video of his outing, but so I can't say for sure, but it seems possible. So it was a little concerning, but I would rather him have that type of issue as opposed to like losing a few ticks of velo or losing his location. His location and stuff were basically the same. I mean, it was down a little bit, but not to the point where you're like, oh, that's definitely the reason why he had a rough outing. So, I think if you can up the sweeper in 2 strikes to right-handed hitters, I think that could be a pretty easy fix to stop that issue. He's only using the pitch 5% of the time in 2 strike counts to right-handed hitters. So that's a pretty easy increase, I think. And I think he can up the changeup in 2 strikes to left-handed hitters. Only using a 17% of the time the left-handed hitters in 2 strikes. I think that can increase as well. So I'm not too worried about it. I think just a quick usage change, and I think he'll be back on the right track.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. I do hope he leans a little bit more on his other pitches. Obviously, the slider's been his number one pitch for maybe his entire life, since he learned it. So, hopefully he learns to trust the other stuff a little bit more because, I mean, aside from the four seam, it is really, good stuff. So hopefully he kind of gains confidence over time.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't blame him for using for using his best pitch in 2 strike counts. But with a guy with a wide arsenal now like him, he has 5 pitches. I think he could probably toggle it down just a little bit, just to keep hitters, guessing almost with 2 strikes.
And I guess the important thing is that the changeup and the sweeper, which you're talking about, are not bad pitches that he has.
No,
they're fine. They're very competitive in those situations.
Mm-hmm.
I also like that they're all pretty much in the same velocity band. That is very interesting. How he's basically got the four seam and sinker in one band, and then the slider changes in sweeper in another band. And I mean, generally, you probably want maybe a little bit more variation, but at the same time, it's like, well, if you got 2 pitches that look the same coming out of the hand in terms of velocity, you got 3 that look the same coming out of the hand in terms of velocity. Like, it's just going to be harder to pick up and harder for batters to know what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about fooling the batter. Like it's been the theme of this of this podcast almost. It's you just want to throw the batter off its expectations, and the more pitches you have, like you said, to do it in that count state, that'd be a great move.
Yeah. Well, we are recording this on Thursday. Max Meyer pitches tomorrow. I don't know against who. I had looked it up, but I missed it. So maybe he'll be good. Maybe we'll finally actually reverse a curse with this podcast. I don't know. It usually doesn't happen.
He's got at the White Sox, so if he does badly,
then yes, 100%. Yeah. Okay. if he does poorly, we've truly cursed him. But yeah. Well, Adam, thanks for coming on the show. Really appreciate your expertise in talking about Max Meyer and pitching in general. Before we let you go, though, how can people follow you on social media? What articles you got coming up in the pipeline? Let the people know.
Yeah, so I am Adam Solorio on X and Twitter. You can find me on Substack at my name, Adam Solorio on Substack, and I write at Going Deep on Pitcher List every week. I have an article on Pete Alonso. It should be out by the time this podcast is published. He's been off to a scorching hot start, and it was fun to write about him and that very fun Mets team. And so you can check my stuff out there, and that's where I'll be.
All right. Well, thanks, Adam. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Great.
All right. Thanks, Adam. You can, again, catch Adam's stuff on the Pitcher List website. He, as you mentioned, has articles coming out every single week, so definitely check that out. But we are going to hop into streamers. Little recap from last week. We had Gonsolin, Ortiz, Kasparius, AJ Smith-Shawver. AJ Smith-Shawver obviously worked, as we just discussed. Gonsolin had a pretty solid start. No decision, unfortunately. Luis L. Ortiz did not have a good start. That one did not go super well. And then Kasparius had he did get a win, but I believe it was a little bit of a weird start for him. But Yeah, overall, recap of last week and streamers for this week. What you got, Patrick?
Yeah, so Smith-Shawver, obviously the big winner there. Gonsolin, I think you take that outing, 5 innings, 2 runs, 8 Ks. Ortiz, definitely a loss. And then Kasperius worked as a follower, but got the win against the Marlins in his first start, which was nice, albeit not with a great whip. We'll see how it seems like he's going to get a tough one against the Diamondbacks this weekend. So we'll see how that goes. Can't, grade win or loss there. But I think that the streamers this week is actually seems like a really nice landscape. I have a couple guys that are pushing outside of streamer territory, I guess, in terms of rostership percentage, but they have such good matchups that I wanted to profile them or hit on them real quick. So one is Michael Wacha, who spun a gem yesterday against the White Sox. He's 32% on Yahoo, 20% ESPN, probably higher now. He's pushed his ERA below 3 with that great outing yesterday. So probably not quite what we would label a streamer, but he gets 2 starts at Houston and home against St. Louis. Neither of which is super soft matchup, but neither of which I would consider an above average difficulty matchup. He's a great quality starts guy. Hopefully he can get a win or even 2. He's not going to get you, a strikeout per inning typically, but he's just a Toby type, as Nick likes to say. And going from one Toby type to another, Jameson Taillon. He's also been off to a great start this year, 30% Yahoo, 15% ESPN. He has a great string of upcoming matchups, so I might be coming back to him for the next couple weeks here. Not because I'm lazy, but because these matchups, it's pretty much as good as it gets. Miami at home this week, at Miami the next week. And then we could even see a two-start home week, Colorado and Cincinnati. So, I mean, I have him on one of my teams. I've had him for a couple weeks because I saw this coming up. That just could be a beautiful stretch for Taillon. Hopefully he just has a fantastic month. And then Colin Rea, who we talked about, I think last week, and he had a little bit of a dud this week against the Giants, but you weren't really holding him specifically for that start. You're holding him for this start next, this 2-start week next week, Miami and White Sox, both at home. Hopefully the wind's not blowing out at Wrigley Field. That's the only thing I'd really be worried about. 35% Yahoo, 12% ESPN for him. And then Nick Martinez, he's probably more traditional streamer type range. 21% Yahoo, 24% ESPN. He gets home against the White Sox. Not the best park to pitch in, right? Great American, but it's the White Sox. And then at Pittsburgh the next week. So another, potential 2-week hold guy. And then lastly, this is your deeper wins leagues only. Definitely a downgrade from the first 4 options I talked about is Ben Lively. He's 8% on Yahoo and 3% on ESPN, but he gets 2 starts at home against Milwaukee and then at Cincinnati. It's a tough ballpark matchup there, but not a tough lineup matchup. And he's not going to go 6. He's not going to get quality starts, but he's had a decent ERA so far and has just kind of been very serviceable for Cleveland. So I think he's worth a look in your deeper wins formats, maybe AL only or 16-teamer.
Yeah, for the first 4 names, I would not be surprised if multiple of these guys are available on your waiver wire. And I do like all of them. I definitely picked up some of these guys throughout the year. Nick Martinez is the one guy I maybe trust the least out of these 4, but even he's shown some nice stuff in random streaming starts here and there. I think the one thing to note about the whole Jameson Taillon thing is that he is worth keeping on for probably 3 weeks based on how these matchups line up. And that could be a really nice thing for your team. It's just being able to pick a guy off the waiver wire that you can trust for a couple of matchups. And then, if it looks like the wheels are coming off, then feel free to drop him.
Yeah. I would have Wacha if he was available in any of my leagues. I got Taillon in 1, I've got Ray in 2, and I've got Martinez in 1. So, I'm not just recommending these. I'm starting these for sure, unless I just absolutely don't need the volume. So, you got to feel pretty good about these matchups. And it's baseball, right? Anything can happen, but I think that they're set up for success.
Yeah, that Colin Rea, just like Miami and Chicago combination, is just going to be a lot of fun next week. They'll probably be on a couple of fantasy teams. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, that wraps up for this podcast. Again, thanks for listening. You can find us on This Week PL on Twitter. Send us your comments and questions at thisweekplpod@gmail.com. You can find myself on Twitter at @TheJohnK. You can find Patrick on Twitter at @PFitzgerald_99. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the Pitcher List podcast feed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts, and leave us a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. Lastly, sign up for Pitcher List Pro. By doing so, you can join us in the Pitcher List Discord, get advice from all the fantasy experts and writers over there. Also, just want to shout out the JOBE.TV streams. We've been doing them pretty much every single day, but highlighting a few streams here and there. I know there's been some big Mets streams, some big Atlanta and Dodgers streams, where we've got some fun pitcher list personalities, I guess, talking about the games. So if you enjoy watching baseball, definitely go check those out. But that is all for this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of This Week in Fantasy Baseball. For Patrick, I'm John, and we'll see you in the next one. Later, everyone.